ever since Tech Field Day the first, we have been having Delegate Roundtable discussions. Initially, those discussions were shared as a very, very early prototype podcast back in 2009 called the Gestalt IT Roundtable. That's what this is. We're going to do a little field day roundtable. We're going to talk to each other about things. And frankly, if you haven't been to field day before, as is the case for our friends Lars, Rohan, and Chris, this is the other thing that happens at field day. A lot of delegate discussion, a lot of interaction, a lot of ideas, and it's really one of the places that the magic happens. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about storage. We're going to talk about the future of storage. We are in an interesting time. Storage as an industry has changed. There are very few storage startups right now. Those that there are, frankly, don't often want to be known as storage. They want to be known as something else other than storage. And it's interesting because, of course, it's not like storage is a solved problem. It's not like we know everything about this field. But yet, a lot of the stuff is changing. A lot of the companies are changing. A lot of the companies are focusing on security or data protection or ransomware or, on one hand, or moving more into data and analytics and storage engines and metadata and preservation and all sorts of other things. Nobody wants to be a storage array company. What do you guys think? I'm going to start off by giving you a chance to respond to this. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to pick on Ray as our graybeard at the table. Has the industry changed, or am I crazy?
The challenge, and this is Ray Lucchese, Silverton Consulting, Ray on Storage, graybeard on storage.com podcast. The challenge is the damn cloud. The cloud is taking so much of IT activity, applications, and that sort of stuff, and sucking up all that work. So the infrastructure that the cloud is producing is not really what you'd call enterprise storage, although in essence it is. They're developing their own storage systems. They're developing their own compute systems. They're almost developing their own application infrastructure. I mean, it's complete and it's usable and it's easy to access. You can get a credit card and I can fire up 25 servers here with probably 10 terabytes of storage and I can have my whole data center within minutes.
That sounds pretty good. What's your problem, man?
The problem is that the vendors that are actually trying to sell storage and servers and networking equipment and stuff like that are seeing their markets shrink because all that stuff is going to some extent to the cloud. And as long as the cloud is there, and these vendors, the enterprise vendors, can't really compete with it because you can't take a credit card to a vendor and have infrastructure in 10 seconds. It takes some time to ship, it takes some time to unbox, install, and plug in, stuff like that. So it's very hard to compete with that sort of stuff. And so though that enterprise infrastructure vendors are suffering because of the cloud. A lot of them are moving to the cloud with their functionality, which is certainly a step in the right direction. And there's all sorts of co-location facilities that some people can actually deploy, and maybe that's another approach to trying to address the problem. But that's my take on it.
Well, that's depressing, isn't it?
Right. Well, I guess that's the end of storage field.
It is depressing if you're an enterprise storage vendor. And I think the challenge is you have to differentiate. There are vendors out there who are doing very well, quite frankly. But there are vendors out there that have had these, I'll call it legacy systems out there for the last 20 or 30 years. They're still trying to sell those systems in the market, and people aren't buying them.
Well, okay, everything you said is correct. And but the good news is, I'll try to lighten the mood here a little bit, is that we had that big tidal wave of companies that did cloud first, and that is exactly what you just described. Companies needed to get out of the data center business. That was the big motivation. It wasn't that they wanted to go to cloud; they wanted to get out of the data center business, and their only option was public cloud. There was no other option. They didn't want to capitalize equipment anymore. They didn't want to deal with the refresh cycles, quite frankly, which in the storage business has been kind of the big thing that everybody hates every 3 years. And Pure had a great, evergreen, right? They were the first ones to come to the table with something like that. That started to change the game a little bit, right? But still, the idea of having somebody that you had to have and manage this stuff, being able to now, have an OpEx outcome that can be elastic, but they didn't all need the full elasticity that cloud really, the public cloud brings to the table, right? And the distributed global elasticity go from July 25th to December 25th type of workloads that the cloud is the real value, and also for the fail fast test dev type of stuff that the cloud brings. That's great, and the cloud is great for those workloads, and the enterprises are going to keep that stuff there. But what we're starting to see, and it started probably about a year and a half ago, and it's starting to snowball, because as you know, once a company sees one company or two doing something, then more things catch on. And we're starting to see this, and is that for those workloads that are on 7 by 24 by 365 that are not elastic in nature or grow steadily, not up and down, right? We're starting to see companies say, hey, I'm spending too much money. I'm not getting the value out of the public cloud for those type of workloads. And so that cloud first lift and shift is costing me a lot of money. I was supposed to save money. Anybody who went to the public cloud to try to save money, right? That doesn't exactly work. But they're starting to take those workloads and cost rationalizing it. That's the term everyone's using now, is rationalization of cloud, moving those type of workloads back into colo, not just ours, but in a general sense. But they don't have the data centers anymore to bring it, because they got rid of those, right? But if you're going to move those things out of the cloud, you have to keep them close to the cloud, because there's now application dependencies.
Data's there.
Yeah. So you're starting to see this adjacency play, right? And we're starting to see some very large data sets. I know of one right now. There's a 300 petabyte data set that's moving out of the cloud back to, because also multi-cloud. Yeah. Oh yeah. This is not. I was very surprised as to the growth. And this same company, by the way, I saw them in December of 20, and they were in the cloud with 30 petabytes. And they wanted to move it out, and it was going to cost them $1 million to get out. And they said, "Now we're just going to leave it there because it's going to cost too much money." Well, now they're moving out 300 petabytes.
Okay, times
exactly right. Right. So like the best time to plant was the best time to plant 1 million trees was 50 years ago, and the second best time is now. Right.
Yeah.
Same with getting data out. So I think there's hope for the storage array and the infrastructure providers at that point, because again, we now have to have data in all the clouds and multi-clouds. Also, people want leverage and best in breed services. We also need to have, custodial data, we'll call it, right? That the customer can own and have on their own adjacent to all these multi-clouds. So the array companies are in the best position, I think, to manage those instances of data and the moving in and out and what's going to go where. So they're just going to have to pivot. Not all array companies are built equally, right, on this one, and I think some of them will do better than others.
I think part of it is that the nature of what's being stored is a lot different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Where it's the idea of elastic workload wasn't even a thing 5 years ago. The idea that you actually grow or decrease your workloads as needed. I mean, you normally had some capability to do that, but it wasn't the same concept of things are going to grow and shrink all the time. The type of things that are stored now are a lot different than they were 5 or 10 years ago. You have lots of media that's stored, whereas 5 or 10 years ago, what you were storing was mostly data rather than media. You have lots more logging and IoT type information that's getting stored now that isn't what was being stored previously. So I think a big part of the challenge that the array companies are seeing is the nature of what's being stored is so much different. I think one of the things that you need to think about is these things are not being stored as files. Things are being stored largely as objects. The objects can have sizes from like a couple hundred bytes to a couple hundred terabytes, and they're not being thought of the same way. So I think the way that storage is actually presented to the customer has to be changed some as well. And I think the cloud storage companies are the ones who came up with a consumption model that makes sense of these different ways of storing things, and it's probably up to the on-site data center vendors to come up with a way of allowing people to consume the storage the same way, because the way that storage arrays are set up now, they cannot be consumed that way.
This is David Klee here. I'm also seeing a lot of shift with a number of storage vendors where they're starting to adapt and work around some of the limitations of storage in the public cloud. I deal with relational databases just like Denny does, and these things can just destroy storage with IAPS demand, low latency requirements, things like that. And when you start hitting managed disks on any of the major cloud providers, a lot of times they just can't keep up. I've been watching and doing some work with an on-prem SAN company that realized about 3-4 years ago they really weren't competing very well. So they repackaged their product and turned it into essentially an iSCSI SAN in the cloud. And what you do is you provision a virtual machine with the compute resources that you want. And you connect it through multiple 10 gig NICs on the virtual machine. And guess what? It's business as usual. And you get much better performance than you'd get with native cloud storage at a fraction of the price, because this thing actually dedupes and compresses, and it works great. It works around all the IOPS limitations and storage variability and all that stuff. So the shift that I'm seeing, it's how you use it, it's what you're storing. But for these legacy workloads or modern big relational databases, I'm seeing a lot of the shift where these storage companies are actually starting to adapt and shift and add to what they can do. And it's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, this is Danny Sherry. One of the things I see that where the legacy storage vendors are going to really have to focus on is going to be the cost per terabyte. I mean, if you look at an on-prem cost per terabyte, you're looking at 4 or 5 digits. Your cloud cost per terabyte, 3 digits. They're going to have to find a way to drop that price if they want to get price competitive with the cloud, because otherwise it's going to be a really hard sell for some companies, especially when you're looking at 100 terabytes, 300 terabytes. All right, that's a lot of money. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Or sorry, petabytes. That's a lot of money on-prem, and it can just it's a lot less if you're going to just shove it up all the cloud. And maybe you put some of it on-prem because it makes more sense. And you need the speed that you can get from your on-prem array. And the older data you shove up in the cloud, where it's a lot cheaper to store it, especially if you're putting it in Glacier or in Amazon or Archive Storage in Azure or something like that. And then it's even less of a price per terabyte.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure cost is the number one concern. It is a big concern, but what you're finding is control and of this data is a growing factor in how companies are choosing where to put their data and how to store it. The newer economic outcomes from the major storage vendors, right? They're starting to respond to what happened in the cloud in the first place, the whole cloud first thing, right? That Ray was talking about. But now, customers, again, did they want to go to the cloud? When they got out of the data center, that was their only option. Now they've got other options that can give you cloud-like outcomes without going to public cloud, give you more custody of that data, something that you can touch, you can see, you can audit, right? So, right now those are looking like they're a little bit more expensive still than cloud, but there are customers that are absolutely going this way because they're willing to pay the extra money to have that control, to have that auditability, because they just feel that, first of all, they get their leverage back. They're, how much you're going to pay at some point, right? If you put 300 petabytes up in a cloud, right, it becomes, what I like to call a data singularity. It's a black hole that just sucks everything in and it gets bigger and bigger. So if you're going to have that happen, you want that under your control, not under some other vendor's control that can raise a price on you, and all of a sudden your budgets are blown, right? So this gives you a deterministic economic outcome. And more when I'm having storage conversations out in the field, it's not about speeds and feeds. It's not even about cost per terabyte, right? It's actually about control, business outcomes. Just like the cloud conversations are not about cost necessarily. Yeah. It's about business outcomes. And so, and I think the storage vendors are starting to get better at having that conversation too.
And, Glenn, I think one of the things that's really interesting is the elephant in the room. And by the way, I'm Jim Sprinsky, Jim the Y guy, also known as, is this whole idea that we talked about in our podcast earlier this morning, which is, where is my data physically so that if there is a ransomware attack, or should I say when there is a ransomware attack, I know what my risk level is. Am I going to have to testify in front of Congress, right? If it's in a public cloud, I don't necessarily know exactly where my data is and how badly I've been penetrated versus if it's inside my own quasi on-premises data center, I know better where the penetration happened, how bad it is, and so forth and so on. And so I agree with you on the command and control, but I think it's really more, not so much about cost or speed and feeds. What is my risk? What's my exposure? And today, going forward, a day doesn't go by that we don't hear about 200 million records of such and such was consumed, and we're not sure if they got the social security numbers as well as date of birth plus name. That is, some of these companies are standing in pools of gasoline, striking matches, and they just don't even know whether those are safety matches or duds. And I
As
think
opposed
it's going
to
to
the
be
people who can point to the box and say, that's where all my ransomware is.
exactly. Or will be.
Yeah,
It's one or the other.
That box right there, that's the one that's going to get compromised.
Yeah. So at least, so there's that.
I think the key is if you can try to, if these vendors can provide similar business outcomes, similar capabilities, but sitting within an environment where the customer can actually control their data, can control their servers, can control their performance, I think that's a viable strategy. That's a winnable strategy, I think. But that's what they have to do. They can't see trying to sell the old array storage to old data centers and stuff is an ending of life for those guys. They have to move. They have to move to providing competitive offerings to what's in the cloud. And a total offering package. It's not storage anymore.
Well,
it's a different environment. You've got to be able to provide the whole solution.
So are we all on board with this, that the future of the storage industry is to have storage companies not be storage companies anymore, to have them be data companies or ransomware protection or security companies or whatever? Because that seems to be what I'm seeing, but are you all on board with this?
So I want to bring in another angle to this. Cloud is great and solving a problem everybody knows because it's being used also. Companies are migrating their workload to cloud. But now we have started to see a lot of innovation or research that is happening in hardware also. So like with CXL coming into picture or computational coming into picture, computational storage coming into picture, with all these new things coming into picture, accumulating or integrating these things with already existing cloud solutions or cloud providers is tough. So there is a very nice area wherein new startups can come in and create products out of this. So like there are companies who are working with arrays of QLC NAND, QLC SSDs, which are not there in the cloud. So cloud to come up with pace of these new hardware innovations is going to take time. And in that time space, we can see a lot of startups coming in and creating arrays or custom on-prem solutions for this. So,
okay, so that's a sort of a contrary position, that there is new storage innovation.
I think the challenge to some extent is it takes, observably from my perspective, it takes longer for vendors to implement new storage technologies than it does for the cloud. I mean, people in the cloud have been doing things with DPUs and computational storage and all these things for years now. And I can't point to a storage vendor that's sitting there with computational storage behind it. It doesn't exist. Yeah, you can have computational storage connected to a server, sure. And control it, yeah, sure. And IoT, sure. And in the cloud, sure. But just not, that technology is brand new. CXL is brand new. Where is CXL being used today? It's not being used in storage arrays.
Ray, I'm sorry. Point of order. CXL just was released.
No, it's been released
this month.
3 CXL is out now. It's been out for years. Yes, it's changed considerably.
No, it hasn't. No.
So I agree. You know what is happening. So all these types of hardware things also takes time, with considering that old storage companies or who are already there in the business, their innovation rate is slow because they have to keep on selling what they already have built and integrating these new things. So the takeover here is of new companies who would leverage. So suppose if I want to create a company now I cannot keep on selling or build those old storage boxes the way they were built. I have to add value to what I'm bringing onto the table. And unless I recognize or take advantage of the new hardware innovation, I would not be able to. So if I'm going to create a costly model or my solution will be costly. So for that to happen, I should be adding that much value also, which I feel that cloud is also in that sense. Uh, Innovation or technology wise is also growing at a slow rate, because if we talk about object store, it is already built. If we talk about EBS, it is also there. If we talk about EFS, elastic file system, that is also there. So now to innovate in this regards or in this space, their innovation will also be kind of restricted. This is what I feel, in terms of a new company taking a fresh take and coming out and building some stuff.
All you got to do is look at Amazon's marketplace and try to track the number of new facilities that are emerging on a daily basis. The innovation that's happening in the cloud is so extreme. There's no entity in the world outside the cloud that can match it, and it's tough to match Amazon. And we're talking Microsoft Azure and Alibaba and Google and all these other guys are fairly sizable players.
Yeah, but you take those services, and you know, I'd like to hear from some folks like in the remote folks, but you know, you build all those services, it's great, but then you got to maintain those services and keep them going. And when you have employee rationalization that's going on right now, that scares me a little bit. When you have that much growth of look at all these things we do, but now we've got less people to go and keep that stuff up to date, that's concerning.
Yeah, I'll be frank. When I look at storage underneath the data sets that people like Denny and I work on, I don't want ultra bleeding edge. I want leading edge, and I want stable, and I want something that I know is going to be around in a couple of years. And call me odd, call me weird like that, but these things are foundational. You know, bells and whistles and fancy features are great, but storage is at the core of what I need to literally park my data on. I need it to be there. So all the upstarts that keep popping up on all the public cloud providers are great. Give me one that I know is going to be around in a couple of years, and then I'll park my data on there.
Oracle. Sorry, I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, and here's Max Portilaro. So I'd like to share some thoughts on that as well. So we were talking. I heard Ray and Glenn talk about the staggering innovation that's happening in the cloud. Those services, you basically get to consume everything. You get whatever you want. But the other aspect to that, the downside to that, is that there's an immense set of services from which you need to choose from. It's kind of complex, to navigate across that. Because those vendors are addressing multiple use cases, very broad use cases, actually, very different personas within the organization. So if you are the person who just needs to go and consume and swipe a card, it's easy. But at some point in time, someone in the organization needs to be accountable for all of that and understand who's consuming what's the use case, and so on. And it becomes almost impossible to kind of untangle all of the things. Why do we have this? Why do we have that? And so on. So that's, I would say, the downside to that, right? And I think that even though it's clear that the innovation is happening primarily on the cloud side of things, I think that, traditional storage solutions still have a word to say there. I think they bring some kind of predictability. I think the key thing, and others say that as well, is that you have that natural extensibility to the cloud, right? It should be elastic. You can move your workloads wherever you want. And another aspect as well is that all of the main technologies, primary storage, object storage, and so on, all of that is kind of maturing more and more and more. And you see that really when I look at the vendors I'm talking with on a regular basis, the innovation happens now at the periphery. So we're seeing people innovate on data management capabilities, whatever, indexing, detection, full content scanning, whatever. On the other side, they're innovating on the security aspect with layers and layers. Immutability on object storage, for example, has been around for a long while. So they're now rather building proactive ransomware protection and so on. So this is really a thing that we're seeing. It's no longer the innovation is kind of halted at the storage, how to say, architectural layer, the lower level, and it's building things on top of that somehow. I don't know if it makes sense to others, if you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, and another side of this that, again, I find really intriguing is as we've transitioned to this new normal, which after the before times, if you will, post-COVID, right, everyone was surprised at how quickly people were able to do things from a data science perspective, from an application perspective, and so forth, right? And so now we're in this brave new world where it don't matter where your data is. Nobody, you talk to a data scientist, they don't know the difference between a JSON document and, my gosh, a VSAM file. They wouldn't know, and they don't care. And all the CEOs and CIOs care about is, why can't that data scientist give me predictive analytics so that I can get my product or my service to market faster? Nobody cares that it's block or file or object anymore, except for us folks that have to do the work to implement it, shard it, whatever it is, so that people can get to it safely and securely. So in one way, yeah, it's become, as you said, Ray, much more specialized. Oh, we can use GPUs and everything, but people are at the point where it's just, is it fast enough? It doesn't have to be the fastest, but fast enough to get the job done. And storage, we were joking a little earlier about it's always the network, or it's always the database, or it's always the storage, but it's munged together in this really interesting blob that no one really knows where to point the finger at unless something goes wrong.
I think Jim is campaigning to be on Data Field Day.
We have those?
Yes, we have those.
I think we should have those.
Yeah, we definitely should have those, given the direction the industry is headed.
Yeah, I think the difference is that, it's difficult to separate the ideas of storage and data at this point. And the more important things that are going on are all the data sciences, all the data processing that's going on, all the AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, all the stuff you actually do with what's stored rather than how it's actually stored. And it becomes a matter of how quickly can you access it, how big a data set can you deal with, that all these general concepts that are more data related than storage related.
And truly, I mean, the question is, what even is storage anymore? If we say storage, do we mean just devices that hold primary random access persistent data? Or do we mean backup? Do we mean disaster recovery? Do we mean snapshots? Do we mean data management? Do we mean all these other things? And I think that as an industry, it's a really good question, because if you go to the Storage Developer Conference, there are a very broad set of topics discussed. If you look at what SNIA, the Storage Networking Industry Association, is working on, they're working on things that are very far beyond putting blocks on drives.
DNA storage.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible what they're doing. And yet, I feel like in a way, some people don't want to talk about that stuff as storage. They want to talk about it as something different. I think marketers are trying to differentiate it, and I respect that. I understand marketers going to market, but it is storage, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel the storage term has broadened up in one sense, I see cloud storage or cloud computing or cloud vendors also providing storage. So even that is into storage. We tend to differentiate, okay, what is on-prem or what is on cloud, but essentially it is all storage. Initially, when the days were there, storage was very restricted. It started with a single disk, then multiple disks, then arrays and stuff like that, and on-prem multi-node scale-out kind of systems. But I feel that wherever you can store your data, that is storage, and how you manage your data, that is data management. And obviously, storing data is not just enough. We have to make meaning out of it, because companies want to create some value out of that data that they are storing. So essentially it is storage. It's just the term is broadened now that so much of new things are there, and we also see that there is a lot of interconnection between these things also. And the way I see on-prem and cloud is that they both are competing with each other to push each other so that they can exist. At the same time, they are learning from each other also. Like on-prem solutions were not that elastic and were not that easy to provision as compared to cloud offerings. And cloud started with a very basic preliminary set of storage services, not with the fancy storage features that on-prem vendors have. But now both are moving in other directions to cater complete use cases. So I feel that the kind of data that we are generating is so huge that existence of both of these would make sense, and would both of these will be there. But till what ratio and what percentage of market share each one would take, that is something we don't know as of now.
You take everything that Rohan just said and add on the dimension of edge, because you have cloud and you have on-prem, which would be core.
Exactly.
And now you add on edge, and when you now we now know that that 5G is finally starting to get there. We're looking at a quintupling of that business to maybe a $5 billion business over the next few years, right? And along with that come the ancillary, the follow-on businesses, autonomous vehicles, not necessarily fully, but it doesn't matter. All the IoT use cases, and user plane functional offload and that kind of stuff, which is going to drive parts of these applications out to the edge. So part of it running in cloud, part of it running in a big part of it running in a core, big part of it running way at the edge. And now we're going to need to move this data, and the storage solution now can't exist in one place. It's got to exist in all places at once and manage, coherent copies of data all over the place, where the consumers might be on the move across multiple towers, across multiple geographies, and the application of data's got to move along with it. And maybe we're backing up data from that edge device.
And access should be there throughout.
Right, and the entire time, the applications that you're talking about providing meaning of that data and creating that actionable information, right, for cars to not run over people.
Exactly.
Important kind of things, or airplanes even. If we add satellites to the whole mix, right, the applications are going to be everywhere, which means the storage has got to go match that. I don't know how many storage companies are coming up to the table and are able to meet this new need of being everywhere at once and serving, and basically the world is the array, right? I haven't seen anybody try to attack that yet.
It's important to think, people aren't necessarily moving the data from place to place, they are copying it all over the place.
Well, so people, I'm talking about, forget the people, I'm talking about the services, the application itself. The people are moving, and how are they going to be served the data?
Right, but an important aspect to think about this is that nobody ever gets rid of that data. It can get moved from place, it can get copied from place to place, but it always ends up accumulating someplace.
Oh, I think it'll be accumulating multiple places. The same data will be duplicated in a core and an edge, and I think you'll have multiple copies.
Yeah, well, I mean, we already do. And when you actually move data from place to place, you're not actually moving it. Right. You're actually copying.
You're copying it, right?
And nobody gets rid of it. And there's just I think this is one of the things that's going to face the storage industry coming up, is that everybody is always going to keep a copy of everything they ever do, no matter what. And things are going to continue to expand.
Well, that's good news for the storage industry.
It is.
I just want to say that in other parts of the world, there may be regulations that you are not allowed to do everything in the cloud. Like there was a news article yesterday in Norway where I live, because there's a hospital that is establishing some service in an American cloud, and the government says, no, you're not allowed to do that. We don't trust American cloud providers. You should run this locally. And the hospital says, no, we cannot do that. Because we have already established the application in the cloud. And I guess also other parts of the world have certain regulations. Like here, we are not allowed to put patient journals in the cloud because it's protected data. It's also because the EU and the US don't have a proper agreement anymore. They used to have, but after the revelations that this agreement wasn't fulfilled very good, so they need to make a new one, I guess, and to make things proper again. But for now, there are lots of things you cannot put in the cloud. One of the first rules when you enter the cloud, you should have a clear exit strategy. And I'm not very convinced that many have that.
Hi guys, I'm Chris. I actually work for a service provider or cloud provider. So storage is one of the biggest things that we actually sell. And as to Lars' point, there are Patriot Acts and stuff like that. So we have data centers across Canada, US. We can't send anything from Canada to US. A lot of cloud vendors, they spin things up where I'm finding the bulk of people are. So nothing against people down south of the border, but a lot of stuff is in the US. Doesn't necessarily work for Canadians, say, to store their data and that kind of thing. However, when it comes to Lars' point about storing protected data, we actually have 2 sites within our data centers that are protected B. So we can actually store government data, things like that there. But we build stuff and develop our own apps and everything to sit on top of storage, like most people have said. It's not necessarily the storage itself. Yes, we consume it. And we have probably close to an exabyte of data between all of our data centers now that we're using.
I want to add to Lars' point, Wolfgang Stief here from Germany. It's more or less the same in Germany here. I'm working for government organizations, and they, of course, more or less forbid to go into cloud or store data anywhere in the cloud. They have quite big security requirements we have to fit, and they won't be matched in any cloud provider anyway. So they build up their own things. They, of course, need their own storage. So storage vendors are in discussion there, of course. But what they also do is they are using cloud mechanisms for their internal IT. This is because of this part of cost saving, and also be quick in deploying services, deploying machines, deploying containers, which, of course, if you need hardware to buy, takes quite a lot of time. So, and they also need, of course, all those surrounding storage services, be it data management, all this ransomware stuff, and all these things. But all of them on-prem, of course.
The regulatory environments like this that restrict where things can exist and where storage needs to be are interesting, but they're like a drop in the ocean to some extent. I can understand where a country would require that their data stay in the country. Okay, so that means the cloud provider needs to create a data center in that country that supports that service. I mean, the guy Chris was talking about Canada and the challenges that they have, but there are security issues, there are control issues, there are lots of issues with the cloud, but it's like the sirens of old. I mean, it's just so easy to use. It's so desirable to use, and all the applications that exist out there and stuff like that. It's hard to fight the cloud without being a cloud.
Yeah, it's hard to put that genie in the bottle. And I think that getting back to the core topic of storage too, I think it's hard to fight the appification and cloudification of storage in terms of if you're an application developer and you want to build an application, are you going to build something that writes to block storage? Not just no, but heck no, right? Are you going to build something that writes to files on a file system? Maybe. Are you going to write something that does objects or cloud object protocol? Maybe. Yeah, that sounds okay. Or are you going to build something that just writes to a database? Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to do the database with the application integration. So it's like, just like, if you're going to build a new application, are you going to develop for the IBM mainframe, or are you going to develop it to run on containers with Kubernetes? Well, sorry, IBM mainframe folks, but probably not a lot of new applications are going to be written to target that platform. That doesn't mean they're not useful, and it doesn't mean that they're not widespread. But if you're writing a new application, then it's going to go to this more modern platform. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, back to storage, it's the same thing. If you're going to be excited about something, if you're going to be building something, you're going to be building it to the latest, exciting, interesting, integrated API-driven storage, not to traditional storage. That's my contention.
Well, I'm gonna disagree a little bit, only because I've had some recent experiences with companies who have gone and they have a lot of S3 storage. And you are right that when there's a new API, there's a new, really cool, interesting technology. Yeah, it's imperative on an organization to go explore it and see what they can do with it. However, sometimes you find that there are a lot of hidden, I won't even use the word landmines, I'll say nuclear bombs in this thing. So in the case of an S3 application, good example, and why, and first of all, where there's data, there's going to be an application that consumes that data. Data by itself is the sound of one hand clapping, as I like to think, right? So, all right, so you've got an application that's using S3. And we look at S3 and the different, and I when I say S3, I mean any of the cloud provider object stores, okay, that are in the cloud, public cloud specifically. And you go and you make an application, that application is going to use those objects. Now, when we look at the cost of S3, we look at what, a couple cents per gig per month, right? Wrong. That's not the cost. That's the cost of just the storage.
The API.
Now, if you have an application that, that's kind of casually looks and hits in that thing, the API costs are negligible. But if you have an application that's taking, let's say you have a 30 petabyte or 10 petabyte, and I'm using these numbers because enterprises have this much data in there. And let's say you decide, you know what, security, my CISO needs to scan that data on a regular basis for ransomware. There you go. Right. And I want to go look at that on a regular, and so I have a process. And we're probably going to hear from a company later today that does this, by the way. And they go and scan all these objects in the cloud. Well, and if they're constantly going through that, that's a lot of API calls. Well, all of a sudden you're getting a bill for API calls. That 2 cents a gig is fine, and you're getting charged that. But all of a sudden you're getting an extra 15 grand a month bill that's like maybe 1 petabyte. Okay. So these API costs, and oh, by the way, you're going to go egress that data out or use it or replicate it place to place. Now you've got the network costs. So you're getting clobbered on all of the ancillary charges around just the storage. So we like to just talk about the storage, and it's oversimplified from the costs. You can't predict what your real cloud costs are having that storage are. And this is what I think has caused a lot of the rethought of where you're going to put that stuff.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at earlier. It doesn't really matter where that storage is, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's in data center. The consumption model needs to change. And I think the companies that are actually attempting to make cloud-like consumption level in the data centers are the ones who are doing some of the more interesting work these days. But, as Stephen said, everybody's going to be using those APIs these days. It's going to be a matter of, are they actually using it against a hyperscaler cloud, or are they using it against their own data center? And the closer that your own data center becomes to cloud-like storage, I think the more you'll see people using their own data center rather than going off and grabbing stuff in the cloud.
And maybe if I can jump in as well on cloud storage, and don't want to be the devil's advocate here for on-prem solutions, but a lot of companies went head-on into putting data into the cloud, and now they're dealing with the massive costs of that, especially when it was not done properly. So there are a lot of projects which are starting on repatriation and so on, and you get to be thinking maybe here if it's if we're getting into kind of a more balanced situation where organizations pick up more carefully what they're putting in the cloud versus what they are going to repatriate eventually or keep on premises. I don't know if that's something that you are seeing as well, but it seems that there is more scrutiny on those costs actually.
Yeah, and I definitely see the growth of cloud-like solutions in the data center, cloud-like solutions within nation boundaries or legal boundaries being a huge opportunity for the storage industry.
I think the biggest challenge over my rather lengthy career, it's evident that where application development happens is where storage starts to take place. So if it's easy to create an application that very, very easy to create an application on operating system X or virtualization Y, then it's going to start taking traction, and those applications will generate lots of data, and the data will stay within that close proximity to those applications. Yep. And this is where the cloud really is taken off, because it's so damn easy to create an application that runs in the cloud. And the data is starting there. And when you go from 30 petabytes or 300 petabytes in a matter of 4 years, it's going to be a real challenge to repatriate that data. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg.
But they'll have to do it.
Yeah, they have to do it at a certain extent because of the API cost.
API costs and just the overall cost. It's going to be cheaper for them to rationalize that on the new model that Andy's talking about.
That's fine. This is one customer, 300 petabytes of data. They're going to move it out of the cloud. But all these 1,000 or million other customers and startups are all creating their applications sitting in the cloud. And they're going to go from terabytes to petabytes to hundreds of petabytes within a matter of years if they're successful.
Well, but when they get successful, then they'll move out. And to the point, to the point that you build the exit door. I think that was who said that? Was that Lars who said that? You build the exit door when you start, and I think that's the right way to architect this. And I think there's been others who said the same.
About an exit door. At the start of a
Lars is.
Well, Lars is, and so are other analysts in the world. So,
but as a startup, I'm just trying to get my application off the ground. I'm trying to get my functionality out to customers. I'm trying to sell product and sell services and sell facilities, and all that stuff is just easier to do in the cloud.
But you'll get to a point where you need to start looking into your costs, right? I mean, as you grow and you need to rationalize a bit your business, and you need to get to a point where eventually you have to do something about those fixed costs. And maybe running in the cloud, the more you have data there, the more it's going to cost you. So maybe you need to repatriate. The other question is how much of it you have. So if you have so much of it, there's the data gravity aspect to it. There's the question of how much time and cost and effort it takes you to move or repatriate all of the data. Maybe it's not even possible, So maybe you're stuck in there and you have no way out.
And I want to add another thing, because if you want to attract young people to work for you, you can't have an IBM mainframe or old architecture. So if you are using a cloud-like infrastructure on the ground, or if you're using it in the cloud, then it's much easier to attract the right people to work for you. Otherwise, they will just stay there for a while and move on.
And they got OpenShift on mainframes now too,
Kubernetes too.
OpenShift is good.
I think one of the things that we're not talking about either are some of the hidden costs of the data that you put on cloud or whatever storage you put on. Lots of times, if you run into a problem with your application and you need to do debugging on it, there's going to be loads of logs that you might actually need to pull down to be able to look at it. And I mean, one of the things that I've been kind of pushing on in the various circles I've been talking to is that if you're actually going to use AI type applications, you need auditable results from them. You need to be able to say, if I got this AI result, I need to be able to go backwards and show how I ended up with this result. And that's where we're going to end up with lots of data as well, in both logs and audit trails on these things. And it's not until something goes bad that you typically need to go pull this stuff out and find out, oh my, I have, gigabytes or terabytes of log data that I need to pour through to figure out what went wrong.
But of course, AI is just a complete black box. So even if you had that, at least it's not going to help. I do want to make sure that everybody has gotten a chance to speak up.
It can't be. If you're actually going to use the result, if you're actually going to use the results of it, you actually need to be able to audit how those results.
They are using the results. They're being done. It's not audible. Yes, you're absolutely correct. It's inauditable. It's uncontrollable. But they are using those results.
Yeah, it's out of the bottle.
I understand that they are using those results. They shouldn't be.
Yeah.
If
you can't actually
audit this genie back in the box, it's gone. It's out.
Yeah.
All right. Final comments from the folks who haven't spoken up. Chris, Wolfgang, Rohan, Danny. Any final comments here?
I agree with Ray's point that a lot of startups coming in, they want to start small. They don't know whether they will be successful or not. They have idea and their data requirements are less. So cloud makes a lot of sense. Maybe 1% of them become successful and become big. Their data scales exponentially. To store that, keep on storing that data, it is very costly. So they have to migrate out. So if we consider both these possibilities, I think both have its own use case, right? Like when you scale at that level, you have to obviously come back to on-prem to save the cost. But how much percentage of that is is also a fair question to ask. But on the other contrary side, a lot of new companies that we see will first choose cloud rather than choosing on-prem solution because of all the benefits that cloud brings on table.
Yeah, for the new companies that are spitting up, buying stuff on-prem, it's expensive. I mean, when you're talking about starting a brand new company from scratch, all right, I got to buy terabytes of storage, I got to buy servers, I got to put them somewhere, be it a colo or server closet in my office or wherever. Or I can just drop my credit card in a portal at one of our big three and start consuming. And then then the company's got to figure out, when's the break point that I actually want to bring it back on-prem? Or when, do I want to leave it up there? Do I want to have some sort of hybrid approach? And a lot of this becomes stuff that they need to figure out. And I don't think a lot of companies are doing that. Especially the startups. If they're born in the cloud, they're typically going to stay there. Because that's where they become used to. And the point was brought up earlier that how do we attract the new young talent? Right. They're not attracted to the old stuff. They're just not. And they're not being taught that in school either, for the most part. They're going to be attracted to the hot, sexy things in IT, and a lot of those are going to be cloud related, because that's just the way it's going to be.
I think something just clicked for me over here. I always tell everybody I love working with data. Storage, to me, I'm looking at how people like Denny and I work with relational data all over the place. I work with data. I work with speed and efficiency and availability. I can run the same data in the cloud. I can run the same data on-prem. I can run it in the edge. I can run it on mobile. I can run it anywhere. I can move it anywhere. The fact that we have to deal with storage underneath it, to me, makes things more interesting, more challenging, and we get all the bells and whistles that come along with it. But I love working on the data. And to me, does the data belong in the cloud? Great. Does it belong on-prem? Great. Do I need to pull it from the edge and park it wherever I want? No problem. I think that's where I have the most fun. And watching everybody discuss on-prem versus cloud, it's fun. But to me, data is everywhere. I just want stuff that works.
And that's a great way to wrap this discussion up, I think. And I really do sense that the transition happening here between storage and data, closing the gap. We did record a podcast earlier today that will be released soon about the hard line between data and storage. So check out the on-premise IT podcast feed for that one. It's an ongoing discussion, and I can't wait to see what some of these new startups that you mentioned are going to do. I can't wait to see where these companies go, what these applications look like. Storage is still fun. So thanks for joining us for this quick roundtable discussion here to kick off Storage Field Day.